Hello everyone, welcome to the revamping, of the rebranding, of the repurposing of the Paper Pit, which is now a podcast about comic books in which we discuss comic books in a podcast.
Yay!
WhyBoy has no idea what I'm talking about because he was not prepared for this.
No, I was not.
Alright, so I had to explain a few things. A couple of years ago, I started a comic book reviewing show titled The Paper Pit. Because I'm clever, and that's a clever title. Trademark The Paper Pit. So, it's basically self-explanatory, really. I use that show to review comic books. The last comic book review I did on that show was at the end of 2015, titled... I forgot.
Professional.
Something to do with a mechanical Kiwi robot. You know what? This is the playlist of the Paper Pit. Right here. It's appearing right now. Ooh, look at it. So go watch that playlist and also that review I made and all that. So the deal with this is that I decided to restart up, as it were, this franchise as a podcast because, you know, reboots are all the rage nowadays. So you take something that people loved to be in a certain way, you completely strip it of everything that make people like it in the first place so that it barely resembles the original product. I've recently watched the trailer of the new God of War, so I'm feeling a bit salty. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yes, a new show, the Paper Pit podcast, in which me and WhyBoy, we team up to review comic books, because I've been reading comic books for as long as I can remember.
And I have not. I've just gotten a bunch of random books over the years.
Well, it's okay. So, the way this show is going to work, I'm basically turning this into a proper show with multiple features and multiple stuff happening in it. Woo! So, the way this goes, we start off, each of us, reviewing a comic book of our choice. I bring today Walt Kelly's Pogo.
And I have Jeff Smith's Bone.
Two comics that had actually far more in common than one might think.
Ooh, that's interesting. I'd like to hear that.
And also, after that, we're going to go into a bonus round, if you will, in which I'm going to recommend a webcomic for people to read on, an ongoing series, because we had to support creators online and all that. You are free to do that as well. By the way, it's not an exclusive of mine. What is, however, going to be an exclusive of mine will be the last segment of our Paper Pitch show, which it's a surprise for now. I'm going to readdress that later on. But for now, let's get started, shall we?
Okay, how do we start up?
Well, I figure Jeff Smith's Bone is going to have the most interesting conversation between us two. So I think, if you don't mind, we start off with Walt Kelly's Pogo, a fairly underrated yet widely respected comic strip that ran for 26 years in between 1948 and 1974. No, 2. Early 70s. By Walt Kelly.
There you go.
Totally on the fly, you guys. Professionalism.
Yeah.
Right. So, most prominently, I'm going to focus on this very book, because this book was published, interestingly enough, in 1954, during the Eisenhower presidential campaign. And it shows what Walt Kelly was famous for as a writer was his social and political satire. The characters are, well, there's Pogo, the opossum, which he created in the early 40s. And At the time, he looked more like a proper opossum, not like this.
Yeah.
But the character was developed over the years, and then it became its own comic book series with its own wacky cast of characters, all living in the Okefenokee, and I'm probably misspelling this, swamp, which is allegedly 500 miles from Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay.
What's interesting about this comic is that the author went out of its way to have all the characters speak in that thick, almost incomprehensible southern accent that's usually associated with people living in swamp areas, like, you know, all the Bayou Billies and all that. So we have this character talk about like this for all the comic. It's really hard to understand sometimes. Or something along those lines. I had to say there was a huge language barrier for me to overcome in this sense, because it's hard to enjoy a comic when you can barely understand what any of the characters are saying. I'm going to give you an example of that. I'm just going to open a random page and read a random balloon, if you will. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, great! There's even a skunk lady that's supposed to be French, so that's not going to help. Just no, this is not. No, wait, this is almost comprehensible. Well, it's hard to give these lines a proper context because they are ongoing arguments here. Oh. I hear you and Turtles had a fight about the date. Well, I is hurt poor old Church's feelings. I owes him an apology. Come to think of it, I had a dream about my pal, and me seems I died. Gulp. And he heard of it, but he were so mad at me he refused to attend my last rites. There. There I lay in the coffin cold and beautiful, waiting and waiting and waiting, and he was mebba sick. He was sick, I was dead. By jing, Churchy, if you won't go to my funeral, I won't go to yours. And that was the most comprehensible part.
I didn't understand what.
That's the point. You would have to have the visual context for it, but basically the gag itself was funny, but not as funny as it could have been. But, you know, other than the language barrier, which, you know, I had to respect the author choices of portraying the authenticity of the southern accent in question. But it's really hard for readers who do not speak that particular dialect.
Mm-hmm.
So basically the funniest gags in most of this comic are the ones revolving around the characters in the swamp acting like doffuses.
Okay.
Completely stupid. For example, there is this really funny moment in which Albert the alligator, which is the funniest character in the whole anthology, if you ask me, tries to win a poetry contest with a bug. No, wait, a worm. A bookworm, a literal bookworm, as it were. And he doesn't know the first thing about poetry because he doesn't even know the first thing about reading. So he hires a ghostwriter. And when I say a ghostwriter, it's a literal animal wearing a sheet and pretending to be a ghost while writing verses on a gravestone. It's funny for the kids because there are stupid animals doing stupid things. For the adult readers, it's funny because there is an element of satire to it. That's basically making fun of the general level of ignorance of the American population. Oh, this is so funny. This silly Bayou Billies. Not like us. We are so much better. But really, where the comic is at its strongest point is when it actually gets into a proper social and political allegoric satire. For example, there is a story later on that really caught my interest, in which Churchill FM, the local tortoise, not local turtle actually, gets actually persecuted by a group of carnivores led by a vulture by the name of Sarcophagus. Yeah, that's his name.
Yeah.
Cousin Sarcophagus Macabre. And he's leading this group of carnivores that actually want to capture the turtle, Churchill of M, with the excuse that he was bootlegging emails. Because that's the only way people in the swamp can actually read emails. Mails.
Bootleg, actual mail or emails? Because-
Mails. It's 1954, so yes, mails.
Yeah. Bootlegging emails. I was thinking, like, how do you bootleg an email?
I'm on fire tonight. Damn it.
Indeed.
Okay, but this whole thing about bootlegging email... Damn it! I'm so used to say email. Bootlegging mails is a crime, but really that's more of an excuse for this group of carnivores to capture the turtle because they want turtle soup. That is a rather obvious and poignant satire about Joe Carty's administration, the Red Scare, and the subsequent witch hunt that followed. The last story allegorizes the Eisenhower presidential campaign, which again was taking place at that time. It so happens that basically a group of the animals decide, without consulting Pogo, that it should run as president. So they start up some sort of political party, which is immediately divided internally once a couple of cowbirds are brought into the picture, and the cowbirds are supposed to represent communists in the allegory that is Pogo. Yeah. They even talk in that sort of neo-political slang that pretty much denotes immediately that they're supposed to be communists. The way, the cowbirds are basically a form of parasitic bird. They had their own eggs, replacing the eggs of the previous owners of nests. They are literally parasite birds. But really, the most poignant satirical portrayal of these cowbirds come from the fact that they seem to be completely directionless. And you cannot even understand what the hell are they supposed to be talking about in their own very particular incomprehensible slang. Which historically feels accurate because there have been so many interpretations and reinterpretations of communism, Marxist and socialism, and even more so in their application to politics and economics, that it's really hard to understand at this point in time what communists really stand for. So I find it an appropriate satire in that regard. And even more appropriate is that there is a character, which is a wildcat, that is specifically supposed to represent Joe McCarthy. And he's a no-good, ignorant son of a gun. Okay. Obviously. So, this whole part of the Pogo's presidential campaign is hilarious by the fact that we have all the people involved in the making of this campaign basically bickering with each other before reaching some sort of begrudging agreement, and then we have the candidate himself, Pogo, doing exactly nothing during this entire time. He just sleeps around, go fishing, the things he usually does in his unassuming, laid-back attitude, which is what defines Pogo as a character. He is simultaneously the point of view of Walt Kelly himself, and also the ideally the point of view of the readers. Some sort of an ideal everyday man that is smarter than everyone else in the swamp because everyone else in the swamp is so dumb, typically.
Yeah.
But the best part of the book comes at the very end, when basically everybody leaves for Chicago, forgetting Pogo, the candidate himself, who was just napping under a tree. And it's at this point that Pogo has a very interesting dream sequence. Basically, the last 5 or 6 pages of the comic, we have Pogo dreaming of an elephant and a donkey playing badminton, and the bird they're using for badminton is a cowbird. And then the cowbird escapes, and they panic, and they end up accidentally fighting with each other. And then there is a gingerbread man that's deserting them. He was going to join the Army of the Realms, and they say that the cowbirds will get him. And the dream ends with both the donkey and the elephant shaking Pogo madly before he wakes up. And then Pogo decides, you know what, I'm going to go to Chicago and vote for everyone at the same time. We're bound to get someone good that way.
Yeah.
I don't need to tell you what the satire is about in this dream, but I will anyway. It's obvious that the elephant and the donkey are the respective symbols of the Republican and Democratic Party. The elephant for the Republicans and the donkey for the Democrats. The cowbird is the communist, and they were juggling him around, playing it in their game of politics. Then it escapes, there is a panic. It's basically a quintessential, inflammatory, satirical depiction of American politics in that very specific period of time. But honestly, it applies pretty well with every period of time, because there is always a witch to hunt if it brings certain political figures to power in order to do so. At the time, we had Joe McCarthy and the Red Scare. At this time, we have Donald Trump and muslins. So really, I find the social and political satire in Walt Kelly's Pogo to be timeless. The comic itself is not, however, because of problems that I already pointed out, like not only the language barrier, which is a bit of a problem if you are not born in America, admittedly, but there's also the fact that sometimes the comic really references very specific events or very specific names of that period. And in order to get those references, you would have to have a certain amount of knowledge about popular snack brands of the time, for example. That's a bit too much to demand for a casual read.
Yeah.
But hey, the characters are fun in their own way, and the satire is inflammatory and on point.
It hits all the right spots.
Exactly. So like I said, it's a nice read and also a very satisfying political and social deconstruction of the various structures of American society. Not just in the period of time, but also, all periods of time. They can be applicable to today's problems as well. With that said, it's not as timeless as something like, let's say, Peanuts, which lasted for many more decades than Pogo to begin with, but also its own unique setting and its own unique anachronism allowed it to be much more timeless, because the humor in Peanuts was more focused on characters' interactions with the occasional jab at certain quirks of American society, but never to the point that it became a full-on satire like Pogo does. So there is a reason why it's not as popular or as well regarded as something as timeless as Peanuts, which, by the way, began only 2 years after Pogo.
Oh, yeah.
Now, before I pass the ball figuratively to you, there's a couple of things I want to say about Walt Kelly himself as an author, because he has quite a legacy before starting Pogo. He used to be an animator working for the Walt Disney Company. He worked on Pinocchio, Fantasia, The Reluctant Dragon, and Dumbo. After his career as an animator was ended, he basically did everything from children's book illustrations to cereal box cover arts.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure that's where many of his snack references come from in this book. Also, I think he even did illustrations for a Raggedy Ann and Andy book.
Okay, cool.
The guy had quite the resume, basically, before starting the daily and weekly publications of Pogo on the New York Star, which he did up until the early 70s, when he died for complications related to his diabetes.
Wow.
So, just wanted to give you a roundabout view of Walt Kelly as an author. and his brand of social and political satire in Walt Kelly's Pogo, using I Go Pogo as a prime example. By the way, one last thing. I Go Pogo, the title of this book, was inspired by the slogan for Eisenhower's presidential campaign, which was I Like Ike. I thought that was a nice little detail to let you know about. So anyway, this is my opinionated, one-sided discussion of Pogo. In the future, we'll try to get comics with more common ground in between the two of us, so we can have a proper back and forth. But this is the first show. Well, technically speaking, our review of Zoophobia was our first show, but it was branded under Dramatisemo. Let's say it's episode 0.
Yeah.
Anyway, like I said before, there is a lot more in common between Pogo by Walt Kelly and Jeff Smith's Bone. Which, come to think of it, doesn't sound right at all. The Bone of Jeff Smith and the Pogo of Walt Kelly. Oh my! Okay,
let's
WhyBoy.
not go down that route.
WhyBoy, I bring my Pogo.
Yep.
You show me your bone.
Okay, let me just stand up now.
No, get down, lad. We have a classy, sophisticated comic book reviewing show here.
With penis innuendos.
Anyway, I don't know if this is true for you as well, but in the Italian publications of Jeff Smith's Bone, a lot of strips from the original run of Pogo were included in the final pages of every issue.
Yeah,
So
no,
basically, I thought so.
I've never seen Pogo before.
Yes, I thought so. But anyway, that's how I was introduced to Pogo at the same time I was introduced to Bone. Also, I noticed something really interesting. This is a picture of Albert, the alligator. Notice the size of his muzzle and the fact that he has a cigar. What does that remind you of?
I'd have to think anti-smoking PSAs.
I
And
forgot to
Smiley from
laugh.
Bone.
Yep. You know, when I was a child, I thought Smiley was primarily inspired by Goofy, which I still think it's true because Fun Bone, Phony Bone, and Smiley Bone, they all seems like the original Disney trio. Either that or the Three Stooges, a combination of both.
Yeah, I would say that too. It
But
kind of
really-
goes with their art style and all that sort of stuff too.
Really, Smiley, from a really visual standpoint, is a dead ringer for Albert the alligator of the Offenoki Swamp. And I think Walt Kelly's art inspired people in many subtle ways, and also consider that Walt Kelly, being himself a former Disney employee, he obviously must have adopted some of the style of Disney cartoons in how he designed his characters, except he used the cute dumb animals for a social and political allegory. Basically, it was a Zootopia 70 years ago, in many ways. Let's talk about Jeff Smith's Bone. More specifically, you talk about it, because the last time I read Bone must have been ages ago.
Yeah, I just reread most of these books in the past few days, and like it's basically reminded of everything I loved about it, everything that I sort of glossed over it, because it basically, from what I read on like when I'm doing research and all that, Jeff Smith basically called Bone, basically like Lord of the Rings, but with a funnier edge to it, basically. Yeah.
I mean, it's. I mean, you would have the super serious characters from Lord of the Rings banding together, fighting the ultimate evil, and then suddenly you have 3 cartoon characters waltzing around. Sorry, guys, which way for Boneville? We seem to be lost. That's basically what happens in the very beginning of Bone, doesn't it?
Yeah, basically the story is we have Phone Bone, Phony Bone, and Smiley Bone being run out of their town of Boneville thanks to Phony Bone, and they all end up split up because of a bunch of locusts and end up in the valley, a place where they have no idea where they are, and they're all
nobody has any idea where the valley is. Does he?
Yep, it's off the maps, and they're just in a place where everyone just trades eggs to like get stuff and all that. and there's evil things called rat creatures going about.
I
Look,
love the rat creatures,
yeah, the
especially
rat,
those two morons.
yeah, the stupid, stupid rat creatures.
One always fixated on having quiche,
Yeah,
the other raw meat.
yeah,
Never could quite agree.
yeah, no. But yeah, as the story goes on, Phone Bone meets up with the main like characters in the valley. We have Thorn and Grandma Ben. Two,
Grandma Ben is
yeah,
the best
yeah,
character.
yeah. I
Just
love Grandma Ben, and I also really like Thorn as well. I think those two are really fun together. And it just starts off with a nice sort of like Mark Twain sort of like very small stories of things. We're just all having fun and all that, while something in the background is just looming overwards. The locusts are coming in, the rat creatures are coming together, and a big war is on the horizon. That's sort of where the mix of the simple, small life adventures and Lord of the Rings just sort of meshes together.
personally, I think that's the best way to not only introduce a new uh, unfathomably large world piece by piece, starting with the small bits and then slowly, progressively getting to the larger and more uh, important stuff until it reaches epic proportions. It works not just as a world building exercise, but also it makes for a much more compelling story because you get to know the characters first, their troubles, their issues, their personalities, before eventually getting to a larger,
Yeah.
more focused, big time adventure in which each and everyone's individual personality are going to be applied to a greater goal.
Exactly. That's sort of what
That's
I like about it too.
that's what everybody liked about
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
I
just
like the I like I'm a fan of just opposing contrasting styles
yeah,
because we have all these characters and creatures, fantastical creatures in this quasi-realistic environment with with lots of potential for epic fantasy adventure,
yeah,
almost something on the lines of D&D illustrated.
yeah.
And then you have these really simple-looking cartoon characters that seem to be waltzing out, basically Walt Kelly's Pogo.
Yeah,
Now, to give you a example that I have right here,
yeah,
theming.
yeah. That's yeah, that's what I really like about it. Just the sort of difference of it, like the hyper, like detailed, all the human characters, the rat creatures, and all that, like super detailed backgrounds and all that. Then you have the three bones walking. And it's like, look at us, we're just basically a bunch of circles connected with one line.
I have to say, it's an interesting juxtaposition of styles,
Yeah,
which clash with each other, but at the same time, they feel so natural going on with each other. And I don't think it's ever properly explained what the Bone are. They are just three unlikely heroes or villains,
yeah,
in the specific case of one of them. They just happen in this valley. They just accidentally happen in a story that's not theirs, but they are somehow involved in it
yeah,
because of happenstance.
yeah.
Or maybe there's something more, like that one prophecy about the one with the star. I wonder.
No,
They're
it's
not
basically
exactly subtle
yeah,
about that.
yeah, we won't spoil anything here, but it basically is all about happenstance and just putting these three characters in a place. And it's just very good for us because then with the three characters who know nothing about the valley, we get all that exposition and comes in more naturally. I would say that
Absolutely.
that sort of the exposition comes in with a lot more jargon than I'm used to. Like it starts to become like boom, boom, and like I'm not listening anymore. You're using too many words. I have no idea what they are.
Yeah, well, exposition in this sort of stories is always a problem because usually it's either two ways, two extremes, if you will. You either don't deliver it and nothing is ever explained, which is my experience with the game Loom, if you ask me, or you deliver it way too much and too much of it at the same time. Now, exposition in this comic is at some point required, especially
Yeah,
to understand what's the deal with that dragon, whom is also always smoking for some
yeah,
reason, and what's the deal with the Rat King, and what's the deal with the Hooded Man, and what's the deal with the Lord of the Locusts, huh?
yeah,
and what's the deal with
Yeah,
everything? So at some point you have
yeah,
to explain that.
yeah,
But
yeah,
the best thing about the comic is that the characters come first, and then the story eventually pick
yeah,
up. Where the character, because before all the drama and the tragedy, we have fun with the Great Cow Race, which is
yeah,
personally my
yeah.
favorite moment
Yeah,
of the comic.
this is my favorite volume of the books too. Like this is like my hands down out of all 9 books, this is my favorite one. It has the greatest funny moments. It has the greatest character moments. Not too much exposition that's beating you on the head. It's just a very good book.
I
I would
wouldn't
say,
have my bone any other way.
I would say I'm just trying to think of like what would be like the most exposition heavy of the books.
Well, okay, just keep in mind one thing. I never actually finished reading Bone. You know,
Yeah,
at some point, I stopped for one reason or the other. More or less, at the time, the King of the Mountain arc was introduced. You know, with the giant lion,
right.
mountain lion guy.
Here we
That's
go. Yep. Rockjaw of the Eastern Border. Yeah.
Rockjaw. That's the last Bone book I ever read. I never did continue after that. I
Yeah.
don't know what happens next. I don't even know if the story was about to end at that point.
There was 3 more books after this. I have like 7 and 8 right here. Ghost
Oh,
Circles and Treasure Hunters. And number 9, The Crown of Thorns is the finale book.
oh, I wasn't even all that far off.
Yeah.
At some point, I would have to reconnect myself with Bone because I'm having all of these memories about it just rising up as we speak, like
Yeah.
Von Bone obsession with Moby Dick and having others Moby Dick to read.
Yep. There's definitely a lot of Moby Dick in these sort of books, and they keep bringing it back every so often. Because it
Yeah,
just sort of connects Phone Bone directly with everything that's happening in the war and all that happens in these books. It's a big thing. And sort of going back to the other point, like all those questions I keep bringing up, like that's sort of like an issue with me. It's like maybe we're giving too many questions. So like maybe we should answer some first, then add another question, rather than just here are 10 questions for you to think about.
yeah. Well, the best moments of Bone were the early moments, in which was mostly slice of life, funny Bone with one of his ridiculous schemes that backfire on him, and just the main focus characters: Thorn, uh, Grandma
Grandma
Ben,
Ben, yeah,
and that guy Lucius.
Lucius, yeah,
Lucius was great.
yeah,
I like Lucius very much. It was one of the only times we have a big, bulky, muscular guy who's also pretty smart.
yeah,
He figures out what those bones are up to pretty much immediately.
yeah. And he's able to make Phony Bone like just have his jaw drop to the ground by how he plays him in the Great Cow Race. Uh,
Yes.
that was
Oh,
a
the
great
Great
moment.
Cow Race was absolutely fantastic. You know, speaking of which, Telltale Games, when it was yet to become a sellout, made a couple of games based off the first 2 volumes of Bone. The Great Valley and the Great Cow Race. What's really fascinating about the Great Cow Race as a game is that you get to control all 3 of the Bone brothers in a Maniac Mansion style. You switch between characters at a specific moment and point. You have them share their inventory, and basically all the puzzles gets resolved by a collaboration between characters. It had great potential. It's a pity we did not get any more games out of the
Yeah,
Bone series, but you know, as an adventure game series, a serialized adventure game series in the format that Telltale Games used to be at the time, it worked surprisingly well.
yeah, yeah. I played the demos for those games, and I did like what I saw, and I can see the rest of these books made into adventure games and all that because it's more focused on the story and all that.
We should do a let's play of those games one of these days.
Someday, yeah,
That seems like it's on our to-do list. But anyway, back on Bone, the comic that is.
yeah, yeah. It's just now like these are the books that I got like in school in grade school. Like every time a book fair came down, I always ran in there and just get the latest Bone book, and I just read it multiple times. So these things have nostalgic quality for me. But with nostalgic quality, I also just noticed like all the exposition and all of that, and all just the odder moments and all that. And so basically, when I read it now, it's like, oh, good moment, moment. Oh no, exposition. Like I gloss over, then get to the next good moment.
It's a bit sad when what's supposed to be the main plot, what ultimately it's supposed to be the main plot of the series, turns out to be the least interesting
Yeah,
moment of the series. And that's where the approach that this comic book utilized to introduce its characters and its world before the story itself actually comes back ironically to backfire
yeah,
it. Because now you're far more interested in the, the Bone brothers having silly moments between each other, the relationship between Bone and Thorn and Grandma Ben and Lucius, and even the two idiot rat creatures. All what really enriches your Bone experience,
yeah,
your Bone experience,
yeah,
is ultimately the characters and their interactions, the funny moments
yeah,
deriving from those, and also dramatic moments too. But if you put them into a larger story that requires a certain amount of exposition in order to get things going, that's when you lose the readers. Ironically, this worked so well for the first half of Bone, but not so much for the second one,
yeah.
half of Bone, because of all these reasons.
Yeah, it sort of leads to the point where they have to rush it in sort of like mystical elements and all that. And just sort of like
Classic McGuffin.
it,
Yeah.
goes into like the weird things like the locust and all that, get into some magical powers into Thorn and Phone later on. And it's just a complete thing where I don't really know what really happened. And just looking at book number 9, I'm just more happy at the sort of like bittersweet ending of it all, which is nice. I didn't really care about the whole war effort and all that, unless it was like Grandma Ben and Lucius and all that. I focused on my favorite characters. I didn't care like what was happening in the whole valley.
Yes, well, interestingly enough, there is a spin off of Bone, spin off slash sequel,
Yeah. Yep, the
written.
quest for the spark. I
Have you
have
read that one?
no, I have not read those. I've seen them and I was interested in looking at them, but I've never read them.
Okay, so it is not written by Jeff Smith, but it is illustrated by Jeff Smith, so there is that element of familiarity. But there is a different approach from what I read about this comic. You see, the way that Bone feels like, the way that Bone is structured, it feels like an episode of a bigger ongoing series, episodic series, in which you have the three main characters just on an endless journey, and the chapter about the valley feels like a chapter in their own longer journey. Or, if you will, it's the Mad Max approach, in which he just fumbles upon a plot that's not his own, and he happens to give a hand. So
Yeah.
that's what the Bone were to the story of Bone. Ironically, it's not even their story, but they give the title to the book. So, like I said, it's like their ongoing adventure, and the valley is episode 16, if you
Yeah.
will. The sequel slash spin off has a completely different approach in that it's basically set in the valley, and the main character is a guy that inhabits the valley. So it makes more sense as a direct sequel of the Valley chapter of the Bone saga, if you will,
Yeah.
but it's not really a continuation of the original Bone trio adventures.
Yeah, they bring in 3 new bones for this.
Yeah, there is a girl Bone too. Wow,
Yeah.
the pushing boundaries. And
Yeah.
there is a Bone with the gray hair.
Yeah.
That's new. I don't. I'm relatively curious about that, to be honest.
Yeah.
But not all that much.
Yeah. Yeah, I might check them out someday after I get book number 9 of the bone books.
So really,
Yep.
it's all in the approach. Really, what makes Bone triumph over other comics of its ilk is that we have funny characters with funny personalities and their own individual stories colliding with each other before we get to the big exposition-heavy moment that's supposed to be the main story, but by the point, it's actually, ironically, less interesting. Ironically, the Lord of the Rings part of this epic saga
Yeah.
is the least interesting part, which is, to be fair, my feelings about Lord of the Rings in general. I mean, it's an important work of fantasy, possibly the most
Yeah.
important work of literary fantasy, but that doesn't mean it's the best.
Yeah. I've never been like much fan of like huge fantasy sort of stories and all that. It usually makes me gloss over because when you get fantasy, it's usually about exposition and all that, explaining the world and all that. Because you got to explain to your audience like we're in the world of fairies now, and this is completely normal here, and here's the reasons why it's normal here.
What many authors, including Tolkien himself, fail to understand that a story, no matter what kind of story, no matter the genre, can only make you invested in it if you're invested in the characters themselves and what they're doing and how the story relate to them.
Hmm.
We did not have any real characters in Tolkien's books, other than very basic archetypes, and we have plenty of characters in Bone, but ironically not a very interesting overall
Yeah,
narrative at the end.
yeah, but I
Which I
believe it's
guess,
because
which
I
I
believe
guess
it's
it's a much better trade.
yeah, I believe it's more the characters that make the rest of the books more forgiving and all that. Like you can forgive the exposition and all that. I may gloss over it, but I'm still like waiting. Like, what's next for the phone bone game and all of that? How are they gonna make it past the big lot, the big mountain lion?
Yes, but again, it's really the characters that made a
Yeah,
story worthwhile for you. That's the reason why I liked freaking Dragon's Age 2, while everyone else did not, because it's a more intimate experience that focuses on the characters rather than having some sort of epic saga in it. It's just the life of these characters throughout turmoil times that happen to be in a fantasy world.
hmm,
And there's still pretty cool things happening, but it's not on a scale of, say, the first game. It was refreshing to me, that
hmm,
type of fantasy game with those types of characters. That's why I'm one of the only people who enjoyed Dragon Age 2
hmm.
more than Dragon Age 1.
Yeah,
Although Dragon Age 1 had good characters too, but that's not the point. So, so there you go.
yeah,
Also, Undertale. Undertale as a fantastic story with fantastic philosophical points and something really clever to say about video games as an art form, as an experience as a whole. But it really would not work as well as it did if it didn't have any of those fantastically written characters that you bond immediately with. So
yeah.
you can never underestimate the importance of well-written characters in your story. In fact, you should start from characters and then develop a story around them. Well, most of the times at least. Sometimes it worked the other way around, but it really depends on which kind of narrative you're focusing on.
Hmm.
Anyway, that's my 2 cents about the art of storytelling.
And I believe I gave my 2 cents on Bone. It's a very good series. Like any comic reader would be happy to read it, even if it has that whole Lord of the Rings jargon to it. The characters make up for that completely, and the art, any art style, which has had sort of like two different art styles, like the sort of Disney Bone guys and the uh, how, how did you put it? Yeah,
D&D-ish.
yeah, D&D. It's sort of human characters and all that. They come together, and it creates a style that's actually very eye-catching.
Actually, I believe the character design, or the art style in general of Bone, reminds me slightly of ElfQuest.
Elf Elf Quest. I'm trying to remember that. It's
I only know ElfQuest by looking at a bunch of illustrations.
yeah.
I think it's an older comic. By the way, when was Bone written? In the 90s?
I'm not sure. Let me just try to find the first book I did. I
Professionalism.
yep, I know. Oh yeah, it started off in 1991. Probably this.
Oh,
Yeah, the volume collection was made in 2005, probably.
oh, that explains it.
Yeah,
So the original publication began in 91. When it did end?
it ended in 2004, and then they
Ah,
came out of
just
States.
wow! It took so long to write the entirety of Bone. I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, over a decade. Well, now we got the full collection.
Okay. So since we are on a fantasy roll, this seems like a good moment to segue to our bonus round of the Paper Pit, which I'm yet to come up with a title for. Bonus update. Let's go with bonus update,
Yeah, sure.
in which I recommend ongoing webcomic series to our audience. And there is one that I've been reading just in these past 2 days, titled Poppy. We're talking about webcomics,
Yeah.
so they don't have official publications, and they are ongoing series that are basically supported via Patreon most of the time, if they get popular enough. Anyway, what's interesting to me about Poppy, speaking of fantasy sagas and the choice of main characters, what I find absolutely intriguing and fascinating forever about Poppy is the choice of the main character. A mom. To have a mom starring in a fantasy story, it's unheard of. That doesn't happen. That just isn't what the norm is. It's either some buff guy or Lena Inverse from the Slayers. So we have a single mom with Herculean strength, I should say, that has to take care of her child and basically has to fight both prejudice and literal giant monsters when they come casually around. The story isn't all that great in retrospect. The characters are fun, but not to the point that you would feel compelled to write fanfictions about them, at least not on my experience. They are okay. They are decently characterized for the most part, and they have a good interrelationship to go through. There is obviously a bigger story building in the background, but for now, for the most part, it focuses more on the daily adventures of this single mom called Poppy Opossum. And I should point out, yes, this is yet another webcomic starring anthropomorphic animals in a fully realized fantasy world with a complex backstory and lots of magic to go with. And you know, and before you say zoophobia all over again, no. You see, the problem at the end of the day, the problem that I had with zoophobia was not the peculiar choice of having anthropomorphic animals in this story, even though there was no thematic reason to do so. Who cares about that? You can choose whatever character you want to tell your kind of story. No, the problem I had with zoophobia was that I was not hooked by the premise at all, because I was not hooked by the characters in the first place. I am immediately hooked by the simple ingenuity of having your fantasy story starring a single mom that kicks monsters' ass, basically. That's so simple yet so brilliant. I wonder why nobody thinks of doing that in, you know, quote-unquote legit publications. Because the good thing about webcomics is that like everything else you made on the internet, you don't have to appeal to focus groups or specific demographics to take into consideration. You just make whatever you want to make, and there are people who gravitate towards you naturally if you're passionate about it. And Poppy oozes with interesting ideas and passion. So I would recommend to check that out purely based on this premise alone, even if the story itself ends up not being all that intriguing. I just want to support this comic, at least by reading it, because I don't see any other fantasy story starring single mothers. I want to hammer this down. This is so unique and yet so simple at the same time of an idea. That would be like having a Golden Hollywood style noir crime drama starring a waitress that's secretly a former Soviet spy, for example. There, genius idea, on the spot. Take it, do something with it. I urge you to do something with it. Sometimes originality comes out in the most simplest of ways. You just take characters that you wouldn't usually star in a type of story and you have them star in that type of story.
Yeah.
It's the whole appeal of something like Game of Thrones, when you have the most interesting and popular characters being a dwarf and a little girl that happens to be a queen, and another little girl that,
Yeah.
it's just, again, it's baffling how simple yet how complicated it is at the same time. So anyway, Poppy gets my recommendation just, by virtue of having a cool premise like that. So, yeah, go check it out if you will. Poppy Opossum. Somewhere on the internet, on the Tumblr, just Google Poppy with a Y and all that. So I might put a link in the description. We'll see about that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was the bonus update round.
Okay.
So do you have a recommendation? Do you have a webcomic that you would like to recommend?
I do actually have one webcomic. It's complete opposite of your webcomic. It's not a story-based one. It's a joke of the week comic. It is a comic called...
like every other webcomic ever made, really.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And this one is called I Am Arg. It's basically a self-insert joke series starring the artist of the comic, Andrew Gregoire, and his wife, Lynn. Lynn, as they're making some random silly jokes and all that. And they also do like video game stuff, a bunch of immature butt jokes and all that sort of stuff. Why I like it so much is that the art style is all in grayscale and all that. He's got a super stylized, thin style to everything. It's sort of like pushes out all the weird comedy. Like the one joke that I can really think of on top of my head, where a Japanese swordsman is going to do seppuku. It's like, oh, are you going to do seppuku? It's like, no, I'm going to do Sudoku. And you see him like carving in Sudoku right into his chest with like red blood showing on his chest. He has like different colors, like make the joke like pop out more. Gray in the background, then red just pops out. It's very visually like eye-catching and all that. So
that seems intriguing. I might check that out at some point.
Yes, and you can check it out.
I do have a lot of webcomics that I am following at the moment.
Yeah.
Most of them are actually a continuing storyline, which is frustrating because you have to wait for any individual page update in order to get the story going, and you can lose track of what's going on because you don't know how much time usually passes in between them. But anyway, I have far more webcomic recommendations to make in the future, but for now, Poppy will have to do. And you...
I Am Arg, and you can see that comic at iamarg.com. Hopefully you'll put that in the description as well. He hasn't updated recently because he's been working on like his own sort of like he's an animator on the side, or
that's great.
I'm trying to think of the cartoon show that he works on. One of the shows is called Ever After High or something like that.
Oh, that! Oh boy. Okay. He's busy with that.
Yeah,
I see.
Yeah, he's busy with that and other stuff as well. So he hasn't updated since the April Fool's like comic book online artists get together where they all just did the same joke. That was a fun little group effort that everyone did.
Okay, so it's time for my super special announcement to make, and just before the conclusion of the show. Recently, something important happened in the realm of internet-generated larger-than-life fandoms. Homestuck has concluded.
Ooh.
You know Homestuck?
I've heard the name fly around. I have not investigated it at all.
Well, it's a pop cultural juggernaut.
Yeah.
What I do know about it is that it started off as an MS Paint adventure with a text-based adventure quality to it, in which readers get to choose what the characters in the panels do in the next updates. It eventually sprang to become one of the most all-encompassing zeitgeists of multimedia phenomenon you can find online. In Toby Fox, he made several soundtrack pieces for the more interactive pages and also full-on animated pages that this comic wound up having at some point. Because as a creature, Homestuck, it's not something that's bound to one specific medium. It's been animation, it's been text adventure, it's been comic, it's been music. And it's been taken by a large amount of fans that made their own animations, musics, voice acting, beats, and everything. It's an experience. It's larger than life, and it's so scary. So scary that for years I've been avoiding it like the plague because, oh god, no, I cannot get myself invested in that. I will never get out of it. It's like World of Warcraft multiplied by 10. No.
Well.
But now that the comic has concluded, I had myself thinking, you know, I could try to start reading it from the beginning. Maybe just focusing on the comic itself, not getting distracted by Easter eggs or fun derivative content, which, my god, is so much. I could technically do this. I could read as much as I can, if I feel like it, during my free time. And then maybe next time we do this show, I could tell you of my experience with it. I could tell you how much of it I've read. And we can do this every time we do the Paper Pit as the final just send-off moment in our show. And I decided to call this segment of me navigating the depth of infinity that is Homestuck, Homestruck. I know, original, right? So the Homestruck segment will start next time, officially. We'll start next time we do the Paper Pit, after all of these other bits that we do. And I'll tell you how much I've read of it, if at all, and my impressions of it up until that point. Now, some of you might be thinking, that's crazy, Madhog, don't do it. But I made up my mind, and I'm going to do it in the context of a show, so it's not a waste of time. So that's my big time announcement. Homestruck is coming.
Yay.
Now, I believe it is time to depart. We have recorded enough material for the first show of this brand new reboot of an already existing franchise. So, I have been Madhog the Master, and I go Pogo.
And I've been WhyBoy, and I whip out my bone.
See you next time.
Bye bye.